All right, ladies and gentlemen, today is Wednesday, June 3rd, and today we're going to take a few minutes to answer some of your questions about the Holocaust. And let's get right to it. All right, so the first question that I saw that was asked was, where were Jews located before World War II and the Holocaust, and how did the Nazis know where they were? All right, so let's look at this map first. So Jews lived all over Europe before World War II and the Holocaust. And we'll talk about how that happened in a moment. It seems as though from this map, which is from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, that a lot of Jews lived in Eastern Europe. 2.5 lived in the Soviet Union, for example, 3 million in Poland. There were also large Jewish populations in Central Europe, Western Europe, everywhere is where Jewish people lived, is the answer to that question. The next question, how did the Nazis learn who was Jewish and where Jews were? So, and I think that's referring specifically to when the Nazis started to arrest Jews and move them into concentration camps. How did they know who they were arresting and who they were targeting? So there's a couple different answers to that question. Number one, especially in Nazi Germany, self-identification was one of the ways that the Nazis learned who was Jewish. Basically, they made it the law in Nazi Germany that Jewish people had to identify as being Jewish. They had to say if they were Jewish or not. Before the Holocaust became the Holocaust, before Jews were being killed in concentration camps and in death camps and being arrested in large numbers for being Jewish, people didn't know that that's what was going to happen inside of Nazi Germany. They knew that they should be alarmed, but they thought that the penalties for not following the law, for not identifying as Jewish, could be more severe than if they just identified themselves as being Jewish. So a lot of Jewish people, in census, in the German census, identified as being Jewish, and that is one way that the Nazis were able to learn in Germany, for example, who is Jewish. They also just used government records to identify who was Jewish. Census data, religious institution data could identify who was Jewish and who wasn't. And then and that sort of government record data also would have been used as the Nazis expanded into Poland and Eastern Europe to identify who was Jewish and who wasn't. But another really terrifying example or instance of this is that neighbors and locals told the Nazis who was Jewish. The Nazis could threaten people to tell who was Jewish and who wasn't, and threaten the use of violence, but then they also just sometimes offered rewards, or really terrifyingly enough, there were a lot of people who were anti-Semitic in Eastern Europe, in the Nazi territories, and they just outed Jews to the Nazis because they wanted to, because they didn't like Jewish people. And that brings us to the next question that I see posted a lot and comes up a lot when we're talking about the Holocaust and the Nazis' targeting of Jewish people. This question, why did Hitler blame the Jews for something they didn't do and cause the death of millions of people? So this is a complicated question, or this question has a complicated answer. It basically boils down to, why did Hitler not like Jewish people? Why Jews? Why were they the targets of Nazism and Hitler? And it's a complicated answer because it goes back more than 1,000 years before Adolf Hitler even existed. The answer is basically that anti-Semitism existed in Europe for hundreds of years before Hitler came to power. So we have to go back to Roman times to start answering this question. And I will try to not spend a lot of time talking about every single minute detail from Roman times up until the 1930s. But we have to start here. So at the time that the Roman Empire was expanding, a lot of Jews lived in this city here of Jerusalem, in what is today present-day Israel, Palestine. And when the Roman Empire conquered and took over this territory, when they conquered and took over any territory, they forced people who they conquered to worship Roman gods. Jews and Christians in Jerusalem, in these conquered territories, refused to do that, and the Romans persecuted them. They famously fed Christians, for example, to the lions, or they put Jews in jail or arrested people who did not follow the Roman rules in these Roman conquered territories. And because of that, a lot of Jews left Jerusalem to escape Roman persecution. And you can see from this map that they spread out between the time that the Roman Empire got to Jerusalem until later in the reign of the Roman Empire up into the 400s. They spread out all over the Middle East, Southern and Eastern Europe, Northern Europe, and up here even as far as what is today Belgium and Great Britain. This Jewish diaspora continued well after this point of time, so that Jewish people lived, especially in Eastern Europe, by the time World War II started. The majority of Jews had fled to Eastern Europe to escape persecution that existed in these other territories. And the question is, well, why were Jews persecuted even well before Adolf Hitler came to power? And the answer is because, in part, Jewish people were minority groups in all of the places that they lived. As the minority, they were seen as a lot of time as an other for not converting to Christianity and for having different beliefs and ideas and religious practices than everyone else. The church, in fact, actually encouraged anti-Semitism. The Catholic Church, for example, made it illegal for Jews to marry Christians. In some territories, they were forbidden from holding government positions or even appearing in court proceedings as witnesses against Christians. And at the same time, that was happening in part because Jewish people were different from they practiced this different religion than other people living in Central Europe and Southern Europe and in Eastern Europe. These terrible racist stereotypes or fantasies about Jewish people started to evolve, like that they had horns and tails, or that they engaged in murder of Christians, and that they one really terrible myth or story is that Jews would sacrifice Christian babies and use their blood in sacrifices. All these things were categorically untrue, but people sometimes believed them, or at least fueled the dislike of Jewish people all over Europe for hundreds of years into the 1930s. The Jews were blamed, for example, for spreading the bubonic plague in the 1300s. So that's an important backdrop to have here, is that Adolf Hitler wasn't the first person to be racist against Jewish people. He came from a place in Austria where, according to when I went to a professional development at the USHMM, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, and was informed that it was probably just a very anti-Semitic area, and Adolf Hitler grew up his whole life believing that Jewish people were inferior. He had been taught that as a young child and grew up believing it. And then the fact that when he came to power, or after World War I, when Germany was suffering all of these misfortunes, the Weimar Republic, the hyperinflation of the Weimar Republic, the Great Depression, Adolf Hitler blamed Jewish people for those things because he had heard all of these anti-Semitic and racist things about Jewish people, and he had always heard them be blamed for these sorts of things, and he made that part of his political platform to get rid of the people that he thought were the problem. And on top of that, Nazi or people in Germany and in other parts of Europe believed him because they had these underlying stereotypes and racist ideas about Jews to begin with. Adolf Hitler was stood up in front of people and said things that a lot of Germans already sort of believed. And then when Adolf Hitler was in power, he used rules and laws to dehumanize Jewish people, to humiliate them in public, by forcing them, for example, to clean streets with small brushes on their hands and knees, or to shave off their beards, or the earlock hair that is associated sometimes with that is worn by Jewish people. The German government encouraged the Nazi government encouraged the boycott of Jewish businesses. So the government then lent power to these ideas, and that's how you got eventually to where the Holocaust became the Holocaust, where it led to the mass murder of Jews all over Europe. So the short answer, like why did Hitler blame Jews for something they didn't do? And it's because of anti-Semitism. These racist ideas existed in Europe for hundreds of years before the Holocaust happened, and Adolf Hitler just played on them. And I think that's especially scary to hear. Like, it's something really simple. Like, it's not a... I mean, it's complex, but it's something that you're probably all a little familiar with, right? Like, you've heard racist ideas and stereotypes about all different kinds of people made, sometimes on television, sometimes by your friends or family, and people make these jokes or comments sort of cavalierly, as if they don't mean anything, but that's kind of what Germany was like before the Holocaust. There is that underlying existence of racism there against Jewish people that Adolf Hitler rallied support for, that led to the murder of 6 million Jews in Europe during World War II. And again, that's scary because it's something that you're probably familiar with in the United States still today. And not just about Jewish people. And that brings us to another question that people had, like, two-part question. I think it's kind of the same thing. It's two different questions, but sort of address the same idea. One question: didn't the police notice so many people were missing, Jews being arrested and killed, and why didn't they take action? Well, they didn't take action because they were a part of it. The police arrested Jews in Nazi Germany. And then part of the answer to this question, there's a couple different answers, and this becomes really terrifying as well. So the Nazis kept information spreading around Europe in two ways. Number one is they didn't keep the information all that hidden. Everyone, all the major countries and governments all throughout Europe knew that there was this anti-Semitism, discrimination against Jewish people. Jewish people applied to emigrate and leave from Nazi Germany in huge numbers, especially after 1938, and they were denied entry into a lot of countries. Great Britain denied entry of adult Jewish people. They brought in a number of children. The United States denied entry to most people who applied to come to the United States. In fact, like the Dominican Republic, a much smaller country, took many more Jewish refugees than the United States did. The United States took a very, very small number. So part of the question is like, well, how did Nazis keep the information spreading around Europe? The answer is that, again, they didn't. Everyone sort of knew that there was this racism and discrimination going on inside of Nazi Germany. And then when World War II started, and as Jews were being moved into concentration camps, the goings-ons in the concentration camps were legally, by German law, they were secret from from what was going on inside of Nazi Germany. So there was no review of what was going on in concentration camps. Like, courts couldn't send people to go see the conditions in concentration camps. That was illegal. Like, the concentration camps were totally independent. And then as World War II raged on, and there was fighting in Eastern Europe and in Western Europe, people didn't know exactly what was going on. Like, there were rumors and whispers about death camps and concentration camps, but it's the sort of thing that people didn't believe until they saw. And that's what happened as the Soviet army marched in from the east, as the American army came from the west. There were local rumors about there being these camps or what was going on to the Jewish people, but they didn't know it until they found the camps themselves. And part of the reason that they didn't know about what was going on is because there wasn't information, which just wasn't as easily available throughout the war. especially inside of conquered territories by the Nazis. And then a really important question that I think is really important for you guys to take a look at. Taking a couple extra minutes. I know I've been talking for probably too long right now. I'm sorry if this is not the best way to go through about talking about these things, I think, online in this way, answering your questions. So take a few minutes or come back later. A really important question to answer is, how did Jews fight back? I grew up not, like, my teachers didn't have good answers. Like, people used to ask, why didn't Jewish people fight back? And my teachers in middle school and high school didn't have really concrete answers about those things. But what's true is that Jewish people fought back hard, and so did non-Jews throughout Europe. They did, as terrifying as it is to hear so many people be complicit in the Holocaust, there were a lot of really brave people who tried to save Jewish people and rescued them and hid them at the potential to lose their own lives. And you can see some of those stories here in this United States Holocaust Memorial Museum video about rescue. And you can also see how Jewish people literally fought back against Nazis in something called resistance. This video is also from the USHMM. And take a minute to watch these videos as well, so that we understand and learn and know how Jews gathered the strength to fight back against the terrible injustice. Jews and their allies in Europe fought back against the terrible injustice that was the Holocaust. I'm going to take some more of your questions. You guys have more questions, post them in your note page from Monday. The actual assignment about the Holocaust isn't due until Friday. Take your time, and then we'll meet back on Friday and see what's going on. If you have any questions or concerns about anything, please email me, and I will get back to you right away. I'm in the process of wrapping up of calling people at home to check in to see how you're doing. I can answer your questions then. If you have questions after I speak with you, email me. I'll call you back. And I hope everyone stays well and stays safe.